Have you ever stopped to think that some of humanity's most impactful stories may have been deliberately erased from historical records? What if I told you there's a profound connection between the fallen angels mentioned in sacred scriptures and African descendants, a truth so powerful it has been systematically hidden for centuries? Right now, you're about to discover information that will shake everything you think you know about biblical history, the origins of ancient civilizations, and the true role of Africa in sacred texts. This isn't just another conspiracy theory or empty speculation. We're talking about documented evidence, cross-references between ancient texts, and archaeological discoveries that have been purposefully ignored. While billions of people around the world have been reading the same biblical passages for generations, very few have noticed the hidden details that reveal a completely different narrative about the Nephilim, the giants mentioned in the Book of Genesis, and their direct connection to the African continent. The question is simple but profound. Why was this information suppressed? Who benefited from keeping these truths from public knowledge? And more importantly, what changes in our understanding of spirituality, history, and humanity itself when we finally confront these facts? Over the next few minutes, you will embark on a journey connecting forgotten biblical passages, ancient Ethiopian manuscripts, African oral traditions preserved for millennia, and recent archaeological discoveries that mainstream academia prefers to ignore. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear will challenge centuries-old dogmas. Before we delve deep into this revelation, I need you to understand one thing. This is not an ordinary video. The information I'm about to share with you is rarely discussed openly, and when it is, it's usually laden with prejudice or distorted interpretations. Therefore, I ask that you watch until the end, because each part of this content connects to the next, building a complete picture that only makes sense when you see all the pieces together. If you are someone who seeks truth beyond conventional narratives, who questions official versions, and who is willing to expand your consciousness, then you are in the right place. Leave a comment now saying what your expectations are about this topic, because I want to know what you already know about fallen angels and their possible connection to Africa. And since you're here, seeking real knowledge, don't forget to leave a like so that more people can have access to this transformative information. Subscribing to the channel is also essential because I will continue to bring content that explores hidden truths, ancestral mysteries, and knowledge that has been purposefully kept away from the masses. Understanding this content is not just about historical curiosity, it's about reconnecting with a spiritual and ancestral heritage that has been stolen. It's about seeing the Bible and other sacred texts through a lens that reveals layers of meaning that go unnoticed by most scholars and religious people. Let's start from the beginning, and when I say beginning, I'm literally talking about the Book of Genesis, specifically chapter 6, where we find one of the most enigmatic and controversial passages in the entire Bible. The text clearly states that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, all whom they chose. From this union were born the Nephilim, the giants, the mighty men of old, men of renown. This passage of just a few verses has generated millennia of theological debate, but what is rarely discussed is the geographical location of these narratives and the true identity of these giants. When we examine the texts with attention to geographical, cultural, and linguistic details, a picture begins to emerge. A picture that consistently points to the African continent as the epicenter of these stories. Ancient Jewish tradition, especially in the texts of the Book of Enoch, which was considered sacred scripture by many early Christians and is still canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, dramatically expands on this narrative. Enoch describes in detail how 200 watchful angels descended to Mount Hermon and made a pact to unite with human women. and the consequences of this transgression were catastrophic for humanity. These angels, led by Azazel and Semyaza, taught humans forbidden knowledge such as magic, metallurgy, cosmetics, astrology, and even the art of war. But here is the crucial point that almost no one mentions. The descendants of this union, the Nephilim, did not simply disappear in the flood, as many assume. There are later biblical references, especially in Numbers chapter 13, where Israelite spies return from Canaan reporting having seen the sons of Anak, giants who made the Israelites feel like grasshoppers. The book of Joshua mentions Og, king of Bashan, whose iron bed measured 4 meters in length. Deuteronomy speaks of the Rephaim, the Zamzumim, the Emim, all peoples of giants who inhabited specific regions. Now, when we trace these references geographically, something fascinating emerges. There is a clear and documented connection between these tribes of giants and the regions that today comprise parts of northeastern Africa, especially Ethiopia, Sudan, and adjacent regions. The Bible itself, in Genesis chapter 10, in the so-called Table of Nations, lists the descendants of Ham, son of Noah, who populated Africa, and among them is Kush, father of Nimrod, described as the first mighty man on earth, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Nimrod is credited with building great cities and empires, and the language used to describe him echoes the same language used to describe the Nephilim, the mighty men of old. Scholars of Semitic languages point out that the names given to these ancestral African peoples often carry connotations of superhuman strength, extraordinary stature, and mystical power. The Hebrew word for Kush is related to ancient Ethiopia, and when we examine Ethiopian texts preserved for millennia, we find detailed narratives about celestial beings who descended and mingled with humans, creating special lineages with extraordinary abilities. The Kebra Nagast, the Ethiopian text that narrates the story of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, also contains references to these powerful beings and the special heritage of the Kushite people. It is no coincidence that Ethiopia is one of the few places in the world where the Book of Enoch has been preserved in its entirety, considered sacred scripture to this day. Why? Because these stories are part of the cultural and spiritual heritage of this people in a way that goes beyond mere religious tradition. They speak of a real ancestry, of a genuine connection to these extraordinary events. When we look at the oral traditions preserved by African peoples across the continent, from ancient Egypt to the tribes of southern Africa, we find consistent narratives about gods who descended from the heavens, united with humans, and fathered powerful children who became kings, warriors, and sages. The Dogon of Mali speak of the Nomos, beings who came from the stars and brought advanced knowledge. The Yoruba speak of the Orishas, who descended from Orun to interact with humanity. The ancient Egyptians extensively documented the Neteru, divine beings who walked among humans and ruled for ages before recorded historical time. The similarity of these narratives to the biblical account of fallen angels and the Nephilim cannot be ignored. We are talking about a cross-cultural consistency that strongly suggests a common historical origin, a real event that was interpreted and recorded by different cultures through their own mythological and religious lenses. But here is the disturbing question. Why are these connections not openly explored in mainstream theology? Why is it that when the Nephilim are discussed, the conversation rarely, if ever, points to Africa as the possible geographical center of these narratives? The answer is uncomfortable, but necessary. Centuries of colonialism, systemic racism, and theological Eurocentrism have created a narrative that systematically erases or minimizes Africa's central role in the biblical and spiritual history of humanity. The truth hidden right under our noses is that the Bible is, to a large extent, an African book. not only in the sense that many crucial events took place in or adjacent African territories, but in the sense that central characters in the biblical narrative had direct connections to the African continent, were African, or had African ancestry. When we understand this, the story of the fallen angels and their descendants takes on a completely new dimension. Moses, the lawgiver and prophet who received the Ten Commandments, was raised in Egypt and married a Cushite woman, as clearly stated in Numbers chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron's criticism of Moses because of his Cushite wife suggests that this was not merely a matter of nationality, but possibly something deeper related to lineage and heritage. When Moses flees to Midian before becoming the liberator of Israel, he is fleeing to regions that, according to scholars, were in the Arabian Peninsula or northeast Africa. The Midianites were descendants of Abraham through Keturah, and their geographical location placed them in direct contact with Cushite peoples and other African tribes. The story of the Exodus itself, when carefully examined, reveals that the route taken by the Israelites led them through territories inhabited by diverse peoples, many of whom are described as being of great stature or with characteristics that echo the descriptions of the Nephilim. The confrontation with the Amalekites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, all these peoples were established in regions that served as bridges between Africa and the Middle East. The Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in Judaism, ended up in Ethiopia, according to Ethiopian tradition, and some believe it is still there today, kept in Aksum. This is not an unfounded claim. It is a belief sustained by an entire nation with historical texts dating back millennia. If the Ark is indeed in Ethiopia, what does this tell us about the spiritual importance of this territory? What does this reveal about deeper connections between the Ethiopian people and the central events of the biblical narrative? When we get to the New Testament, we find Simon of Cyrene, the man who carried Jesus' cross, was from Cyrenaica, a region of present-day Libya. An African played the crucial role of literally carrying the instrument of Christian salvation. The Ethiopian eunuch baptized by Philip in Acts chapter 8 was a high-ranking official of the Queen of Ethiopia, demonstrating that there was already an established connection between Judaism or proto-Christianity and the Ethiopian nobility. These are not peripheral details. They are clear indications that Africa was not on the margins of biblical history. It was at its center. But returning to the fallen angels and their descendants, we need to understand exactly what these beings brought to humanity and why this was considered so dangerous by the heavenly authorities. The Book of Enoch explicitly lists the forbidden knowledge shared by the Watchers. Azazel taught men how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, showing them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. He also taught women the art of beautification, the use of cosmetics, precious stones, and dyes, causing great impiety on earth. Semyaza taught enchantments and root cutting. Armaros taught the solution of enchantments. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabeel taught the signs. Tamiel taught astronomy. And Asaradel taught the movement of the moon. This knowledge, which today we consider science and technology, was seen as sacred and exclusive to celestial beings. When it was prematurely transmitted to humanity, it caused a fundamental imbalance in the cosmic order. The consequences were devastating: widespread violence, moral corruption, occult practices, and the birth of a generation of hybrids, the Nephilim, who were physically superior to ordinary humans and who used their advantage to dominate and oppress. The biblical narrative is clear in stating that human wickedness had become so great that God regretted creating humanity, leading to the flood. But here is the crucial detail that is rarely emphasized. Not all of the Nephilim lineage was destroyed. The Bible itself contradicts the notion that they all perished, as it continues to mention giants and peoples of great stature after the flood. This means that either some Nephilim survived or the genetics of the fallen angels continued through other lineages that survived in the ark or subsequently mixed. When we trace the post-flood biblical references to giants, something fascinating emerges. These peoples are consistently located in specific regions, forming a geographical arc that stretches from northeast Africa to the Levant and Mesopotamia. The Rephaim inhabited the region that is now Jordan and parts of Syria. The Anakim were in Canaan, particularly in Hebron. The Emim were in Moab, the Zamzumim in Ammon. Og of Bashan ruled territories to the north, and all these territories were on trade and migration routes that connected directly with northeast Africa, with Kush, with Ethiopia, with Egypt. We live in extremely difficult times in which prophecies are marked, but many still do not realize what is happening in the world. For this, I have made my ebook available to reveal the apocalypse, which you can download immediately through the first set of comments. This book will help you uncover all the mysteries of the apocalypse and transform your life. Go to the first set of comments to get your copy, as very little remains and will be removed soon. Don't waste time. Click now and secure your digital copy. And don't forget to get your Reveal the Apocalypse ebook. It is very important that you buy it quickly before the copies run out. Now we're going to delve into a revelation that will leave you speechless and exposes a truth so profound that it has been systematically erased from conventional religious teachings. When we analyze the biblical texts in their original languages, Hebrew and Aramaic, we discover that the descriptions of the Nephilim and the giant peoples are not merely about physical stature, although that is included, but also about extraordinary abilities, advanced knowledge, and a special connection to the spiritual realm. The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew root naphal, which means to fall, but can also mean to lie down or prostrate oneself. Some scholars argue that Nephilim can be translated not only as the fallen ones, but also as those who cause others to fall, suggesting their role as dominant and oppressive warriors. Others propose that it means those who descended, reinforcing the celestial origin of their angelic ancestors. Regardless of the exact translation, what is undeniable is that these beings were seen as extraordinary, fearsome, and fundamentally different from ordinary humans. When the Israelite spies returned from Canaan and reported seeing the Nephilim, they said they felt like grasshoppers in the eyes of these giants. This is not merely a description of a difference in size, it is a description of an essential difference in nature, an awareness that they were facing something that transcended ordinary humanity. Now, when we connect this with African records, we find extraordinarily similar narratives. Egyptian texts speak of the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, beings who ruled Egypt before the human dynasties, during what is called Zep-Tepi, the first time. These beings are described as possessing divine knowledge, builders of impossible monuments and masters of occult sciences. The astronomical precision of the pyramids, the advanced medical knowledge found in the papyri, the sophisticated understanding of mathematics and sacred geometry, all this is attributed to these divine ancestors who walked among humans. In Ethiopia, ancient texts speak of a golden age when celestial beings ruled directly, and from this union came royal lineages that maintained divine blood. Ethiopia's own Solomonic dynasty claimed descent from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, but behind this claim lay a deeper belief in a heritage that stretched back to primordial times, to the days when heaven and earth were not separate as they are now. The tribes of inland Africa preserved in their oral traditions stories of giants who lived in the mountains and forests, beings of great power who were eventually defeated or retreated to hidden realms. Archaeologists and anthropologists working in Africa frequently report discovering skeletons of unusual proportions, gigantic tools, and megalithic structures whose construction defies conventional explanations. But these discoveries rarely receive the attention or funding that similar discoveries in other parts of the world receive. Why? Because recognizing Africa as the cradle of ancient advanced civilizations, possibly connected to the biblical Nephilim, would destroy established narratives about human progress, civilizational superiority, and the origin of spiritual and scientific knowledge. There is a conscious and systematic effort to minimize or ignore evidence that would place Africa at the center of humanity's spiritual history. When you examine the criteria used by academia to evaluate claims about ancient civilizations, there's an obvious double standard. Megalithic structures in Europe or Asia receive extensive research, funding, and recognition, while equally impressive structures in Africa are often attributed to natural causes or left without adequate study. Great Zimbabwe, the Nubian pyramids, the Ethiopian structures of Lalibela carved from solid rock, the monoliths of Axum, all these architectural marvels demonstrate advanced knowledge and engineering prowess that defies conventional explanations of the resources and organization available at those times. But instead of exploring the possibility that these cultures had access to knowledge transmitted from earlier times, possibly from the Nephilim themselves, the tendency is to minimize their achievements or attribute them to external influences. This is the same racist logic that has suggested for centuries that the Egyptians could not have been African, leading to absurd attempts to whitewash Egyptian history, despite all evidence to the contrary. The fact is that Egypt is African, always has been, and its connection to the rest of the continent is deep and undeniable. When Herodotus, the Greek historian, visited Egypt, he was impressed by the antiquity of the civilization and reported that the Egyptians themselves said that their wisdom came from time immemorial, from eras when gods walked the earth. Egyptian priests kept records that, according to them, dated back tens of thousands of years, records that spoke of multiple cycles of civilization and destruction. Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, recounts the story of Atlantis, which he claims was told to Solon by Egyptian priests. This story speaks of an ancient war between Athens and Atlantis that occurred 9,000 years before Solon's time. If we accept these accounts, we are talking about civilizational memories that date back more than 11,000 years. And what was the nature of the Atlanteans according to Plato? He describes them as initially virtuous, but eventually corrupted, possessing advanced technology and immense power until their arrogance led to their destruction by divine forces. This narrative perfectly echoes the story of the Nephilim, beings of great power and knowledge who eventually became corrupted and were destroyed by divine intervention. Some researchers argue that Atlantis, if it existed, could have been located not in the Atlantic, but in Africa, possibly in the Sahara region, which we know was a humid tropical climate in prehistoric times, or in the regions now submerged by the waters of the Mediterranean. Let's delve even deeper into this connection between the descendants of fallen angels and Africa, exploring the genetic, cultural, and spiritual implications that have been systematically ignored. There's a reason why human genetic diversity is greater in Africa than anywhere else in the world, and that reason goes beyond the conventional explanation that humanity originated there. If there was indeed a mixing between fallen angels and humans, and if that mixing occurred predominantly in African or adjacent regions, then one would expect to find greater genetic diversity precisely in those regions, because you would be dealing not only with normal human variation, but with the introduction of non-human genetic material into the population. Modern genetic studies have identified that all humans outside of Africa share a more limited set of genetic variation compared to African populations, which is consistent with the model of a single origin in Africa followed by migrations. But there are also anomalies in the human genome that scientists have difficulty explaining, sequences that seem to lack a clear evolutionary path, gene expressions that suggest events of abrupt introduction of new traits. While mainstream science attributes this to random mutations and selective pressures, some question whether some of these genetic leaps could have originated from the unions between humans and non-humans described in ancient texts. Even more fascinating is the distribution of certain physical characteristics that, according to ancient records, were hallmarks of the Nephilim: exceptional stature, extraordinary physical strength, increased longevity, and superior mental capacities. While the Bible speaks of antediluvian patriarchs who lived for hundreds of years, after the flood, we see a gradual decrease in recorded life expectancy. This could be interpreted as a progressive dilution of the special genetics that some humans carried. However, certain lineages, particularly in Africa, maintain traditions of ancestors who lived extraordinarily long lives and possessed superhuman abilities. The Dogon of Mali, for example, maintain astronomical knowledge about the Sirius star system that should not be possible without advanced telescopes, including information about Sirius B, a white dwarf star that was only discovered by modern astronomy in 1862. When asked about the origin of this knowledge, the Dogon point to their ancestors who were instructed by the Nomos, amphibious beings who came from Sirius to teach humanity. This narrative of non-human beings bringing forbidden knowledge is identical to the story of the guardian angels and the knowledge they transmitted. Throughout Africa, from north to south, from east to west, we find traditions of ancestral heroes, divine kings, and special lineages that claim descent from unions between mortals and immortals. The Yoruba of Nigeria have a complex cosmology with over 400 orishas, many of whom are described as having walked the earth in physical form, ruled cities, and married humans before returning to the divine realm. Shango, the Orisha of thunder, is described as having been a historical king of Oyo before becoming a deity. This blend of history and mythology, where deities were also historical rulers, is found in Greek, Egyptian, Mesopotamian traditions, and crucially in the biblical narratives about the Nephilim, who became the mighty men of old, men of renown. The connection between Africa and the biblical account of fallen angels becomes even clearer when we examine the geographical context of Eden. Genesis chapter 2 describes a river that flowed out of Eden and divided into 4 branches: Pishon, which encircled the whole land of Havilah, where there was gold; Gihon, which encircled the whole land of Kush; Tigris, which went east of Assyria; and Euphrates. While the Tigris and Euphrates are easily identifiable as rivers of Mesopotamia, the identity of Pishon and Gihon has been debated. The specific mention that Gihon surrounded Kush, which, as we have already established, refers to the Ethiopian Sudanese region, places Africa directly within the geographical context of Eden. Some scholars propose that Gihon may be the Nile, which in fact flows through the Kushite region. If this is correct, then the Garden of Eden was not only near Africa, but positioned at an intersection between Africa and Asia, precisely where we find the first historical civilizations and where, according to the biblical narrative, the fall of the angels and the birth of the Nephilim occurred. It is no coincidence that the oldest known civilizations, Sumer in Mesopotamia and Egypt in Africa, seemingly arose from nothing, with advanced knowledge already established in writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, architecture, and social organization. The conventional paradigm of gradual civilizational development does not adequately explain the abrupt emergence of these sophisticated cultures. But if there was a transmission of knowledge from superior beings, the fallen angels and their Nephilim descendants, then the sudden appearance of advanced civilization makes much more sense. The Sumerians attributed their knowledge to the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the sky to teach humanity. The similarities between the Sumerian Anunnaki, the watchers of the Book of Enoch, and the Egyptian Neteru are too striking to be coincidental. All are described as celestial beings who interacted directly with humans, transmitted forbidden or sacred knowledge, engaged sexually with humans generating hybrid offspring, and were eventually punished or withdrew, leaving humanity to deal with the consequences of their actions. What happens when we start connecting all these dots and realize that the narrative we've been told about human history, about biblical history, and about Africa's role in both is fundamentally incomplete? We begin to see that there has been a deliberate effort over the centuries, especially during the last 500 years of European colonialism, to separate Africa from its legitimate spiritual and historical heritage. When European missionaries arrived in Africa, they didn't find peoples without religion or spirituality. They found complex belief systems, sophisticated religious practices, and oral traditions that preserved profound ancestral knowledge. But instead of recognizing and studying these traditions, the colonial project was dedicated to suppressing them, labeling them as primitive or demonic, and replacing them with European versions of Christianity that conveniently erased any positive connection between Africa and the biblical narrative. The Christianity that was imposed on Africa during the colonial period was a Christianity that presented Jesus as European, that ignored the African characters in the Bible, that never mentioned that much of biblical history took place on African soil or involved African peoples. It was a form of Christianity that taught Africans to despise their own traditions as pagan, while simultaneously robbing those same traditions of their legitimate spiritual context and meaning. But the truth cannot be suppressed forever, and today, thanks to the work of African and Afro-diasporic scholars, honest historians and spiritual researchers committed to the truth, these connections are being rediscovered and reaffirmed. When we read the Bible with knowledge of African history, African geography, and African spiritual traditions, a completely different picture emerges. We see that Moses, the greatest prophet of Judaism, was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, meaning he had access to the deepest spiritual mysteries of the most advanced African civilization of his time. His Kushite wife was not an insignificant side note. She was an indication of his connection to the spiritual traditions of southern Egypt, Nubia, and Ethiopia. When Moses ascends Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments, he is recreating a pattern of spiritual ascension that was well known in African mystical traditions, where the initiate ascends the sacred mountain to encounter the divine. The practices described in the tabernacle and later in Solomon's temple, with its sacred ark, its holy of holies, its elaborate rituals, all have parallels in African spiritual practices that preceded Judaism. The very concept of a sacred object containing divine power, such as the Ark of the Covenant, is found in African traditions where special objects serve as dwelling places for spiritual forces. When we arrive at the era of the kings of Israel, we see even more direct connections to Africa. The Queen of Sheba, who visited Solomon, and about whom the Bible says that she brought magnificent gifts and tested Solomon with difficult questions, was African, specifically from the region that is now Ethiopia and Yemen. Ethiopian tradition, preserved in the Kebra Nagast, dramatically expands on this story, stating that the Queen of Sheba and Solomon had a son, Menelik, who became the first emperor of the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia, and who brought the Ark of the Covenant to Axum, where, according to Ethiopian believers, it remains to this day. Even if we consider this legend, the persistence of this tradition for thousands of years and its central importance to Ethiopian spiritual identity indicates a profound connection between the Ethiopian people and the biblical narrative that goes far beyond mere geographical proximity. There is a claim of direct heritage, of spiritual lineage that goes back to the days of Solomon, Moses, and beyond, to the days of the fallen angels and their Nephilim descendants. The prophet Zephaniah in his book, chapter 3, verse 10, prophesies, "Beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshippers, the daughter of my dispersed ones, shall bring my offering." This is a prophecy that places Ethiopia, Kush, in an important eschatological role, suggesting that genuine worship of the God of Israel will come from this region. Psalm 87 speaks of Kush among those born in Zion, elevating the spiritual status of the Kushite people. The prophet Isaiah in chapter 18 describes a land beyond the rivers of Kush that will send ambassadors by sea, a tall and smooth-skinned people, a people terrible from their beginning. This description of a people terrible from their beginning echoes the language used to describe the Nephilim, the mighty men of old. Now let's explore something that will shake your understanding even more deeply: the theological and political reasons why this connection between the descendants of fallen angels and Africa has been systematically concealed, and why its revelation is so dangerous to established power structures. If we acknowledge that Africans are direct descendants of, or have a special connection to, lineages that trace back to the Nephilim, the giants, the beings who possess divine knowledge and extraordinary abilities, this radically changes the narrative of racial inferiority that has been used to justify centuries of slavery, colonialism, and systematic oppression. The ideology that underpinned the transatlantic slave trade crucially depended on the dehumanization of Africans, presenting them as primitive, without history, without civilization, and spiritually empty. This false narrative was deliberately constructed, despite abundant historical evidence to the contrary. The Europeans who arrived in Africa found established kingdoms, sophisticated political systems, refined artistic traditions, and profound spiritual knowledge. The Mali Empire under Mansa Musa was the richest nation in the world in the 14th century. The Kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia was a commercial and military power that maintained diplomatic relations with Rome and Byzantium. The Kingdom of Congo had a complex governmental structure and a capital, Mbanza, Congo, that rivaled European cities of the time. But acknowledging these realities would tremendously complicate the moral justification for slavery and colonial exploitation. So these stories were suppressed, distorted, or ignored. Similarly, recognizing that the Bible places Africans at the center of its spiritual narrative, that crucial biblical characters were African or had African connections, that African spiritual traditions are not primitive but represent profound ancestral wisdom, possibly derived from the same celestial beings that appear in the Bible. All of this would destroy the narrative of European spiritual superiority that was used to justify the imposition of European Christianity on colonized peoples. There is immense power in controlling spiritual narratives, in determining who is closer to the divine, who carries sacred heritage, and who deserves spiritual leadership. If Africa is recognized as having a legitimate, perhaps even primordial claim to the biblical heritage and spiritual knowledge transmitted by fallen angels, then all established hierarchies are questioned. This is why the suppression was so systematic, so complete, and so violent. During the colonial era, African spiritual practices were criminalized. Sacred objects were destroyed or stolen for European museums. Initiates and priests were persecuted and killed. Temples and sacred sites were desecrated. This was not merely a project of political and economic domination. It was a project of spiritual destruction, an attempt to sever African peoples from their spiritual roots and ancestral knowledge. But despite all this, much was preserved, hidden in oral traditions, codified in practices that seem folkloric but carry profound wisdom, kept alive by communities that refuse to abandon their heritage. And in the African diaspora, in the Americas, in the Caribbean, African spiritual practices mixed with imposed Christianity, creating powerful syntheses such as candomblé, santeria, voodoo, hoodoo, all of which maintain connections with the orishas, with divine ancestors, with the spirits that connect heaven and earth. These practices were demonized and persecuted because they represented spiritual resistance, a refusal to accept total spiritual erasure. When we look at the Rastafari movement, we see a religion that emerged in Jamaica in the 20th century, explicitly reconnecting Africans of the diaspora with their Ethiopian heritage, identifying Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia, as the manifestation of God on earth, and Ethiopia as Zion, the spiritual promised land. Rastafarians read the Bible through an African lens, identify with the oppressed Israelites in Egypt and Babylon, and see their redemption in reconnecting with Africa and their African spiritual heritage. This is not an isolated movement. It is part of a broader awakening among African and Afro-descendant peoples to reclaim their true spiritual history. When we study the writings of Pan-Africanist thinkers, we frequently find references to African spiritual and civilizational greatness, to the need to decolonize the mind and recover ancestral knowledge. Cheikh Anta Diop demonstrated through meticulous research the African contributions to world civilization and the African origins of ancient Egypt. John Henrik Clarke compiled extensive evidence on sophisticated African kingdoms and African connections to the biblical narrative. Yosef Ben Jochanan argued vigorously for the African origins of Abrahamic religions and the European appropriation of this heritage. We now arrive at an even deeper and more disturbing dimension of this revelation. What happened to the knowledge that the fallen angels transmitted to humans, and how this knowledge was preserved, transmitted, and eventually fragmented into different esoteric traditions around the world? The Book of Enoch specifically lists the forbidden knowledge that was taught by the Watchers: metallurgy and weapons making, cosmetics and ornamentation, astrology and astronomy, magic and enchantments, medicinal botany and poisons, and knowledge of celestial cycles and the movement of celestial bodies. These were not merely practical skills. They were forms of knowledge that allowed humans to manipulate the material and spiritual world in ways that were previously exclusive to celestial beings. When this knowledge was transmitted, it did not disappear with the flood, because Noah and his family carried it with them, or it was later rediscovered, or it was preserved by lineages that survived through other means. What we know for sure is that ancient civilizations around the world, but especially in Africa and the Middle East, demonstrated mastery of knowledge they shouldn't have possessed, based on the conventional model of gradual civilizational development. The Egyptians built the pyramids with mathematical precision and astronomical alignment that still defy complete explanation. The Great Pyramid incorporates the number pi, the golden ratio, precise knowledge of the Earth's dimensions, and is aligned with extraordinary precision to the cardinal points and specific constellations. Egyptian temples were built with stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, cut, transported and positioned, using techniques we still cannot replicate with certainty. Egyptian medical texts describe sophisticated surgical procedures, including brain surgery. The Ebers and Edwin Smith papyri reveal advanced anatomical and pharmacological knowledge. In Mesopotamia, Sumerian tablets describe detailed astronomical knowledge, including information about planets not visible to the naked eye. The Epic of Gilgamesh, predating the biblical flood, tells stories of semi-divine beings and giants. In Ethiopia, the churches of Lalibela were carved directly from solid rock in a single block, creating complex structures with precise architectural details through a process that would have been extremely difficult even with modern technology. Ethiopian tradition, attributes their construction to King Lalibela with divine assistance, suggesting special or supernatural knowledge was involved. In Nubia, the Sudanese pyramids, more numerous than the Egyptian ones, demonstrate continuity in African architectural and spiritual tradition. Throughout Africa, we find megalithic structures, stone circles, monoliths, and architectural complexes that indicate advanced astronomical, mathematical, and engineering knowledge. When this technical and scientific knowledge is examined alongside the spiritual and mystical traditions of these cultures, a pattern emerges. There is a profound connection between technical knowledge and spiritual knowledge, between the ability to manipulate the physical world and the ability to access spiritual dimensions. In African mystical traditions, particularly Egyptian ones, the initiate underwent a process of spiritual transformation involving symbolic death and rebirth, ascension through levels of consciousness, and eventually union with the divine. This process was not merely metaphorical. It involved real consciousness-altering practices, breathing techniques, the use of sacred substances, prolonged fasts, elaborate rituals, and direct instruction by initiated priests who guarded secret knowledge. The mysteries of Isis and Osiris in Egypt, the mystery cults that spread throughout the ancient world, the Gnostic systems that combined Greek philosophy with Eastern and African mysticism, all preserved fragments of the original knowledge transmitted by the Watchers. Jewish Kabbalah, which emerged in the Middle Ages, but claims much older roots, preserves knowledge about the spheres of creation, divine names, and angelic forces that echo the descriptions in the Book of Enoch of the celestial hierarchy. Alchemy, which combines practical chemistry with spiritual philosophy, was preserved and developed by African, Arab, and European scholars, always with the understanding that the transformation of base metals into gold was also a metaphor for the spiritual transformation of the practitioner. Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary figure to whom the founding of alchemy and astrology is attributed, is identified with the Egyptian god Thoth, the divine scribe and master of hidden wisdom. The Hermetic texts, including the Emerald Tablet and the Corpus Hermeticum, preserve teachings on correspondences between the microcosm and the macrocosm, on the principle of as above, so below, and on the nature of mind and reality that are deeply consistent with ancient African mysticism. Let us now explore the eschatological and prophetic implications of this connection between the descendants of fallen angels and Africa, because this is not merely a matter of past history, but has direct ramifications for the present and future spiritual life of humanity. In various prophetic traditions, including biblical interpretations, there is an expectation that in the end times there will be a return or resurgence of ancient knowledge, a revelation of truths that have been hidden, and a special role for certain peoples and nations in global spiritual transformation. The prophecy of Joel, chapter 2, verse 28 says, "And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions." This prophecy speaks of a democratization of spiritual access, where not only specially chosen priests and prophets, but all flesh will have direct access to the divine. In the context of our discussion, this can be interpreted as a return to the state prior to the definitive separation between the celestial and earthly realms, a time when communication between humans and spiritual beings was more common. The prophecies concerning Ethiopia are particularly significant in this context. Psalm 68, verse 31 declares, "Ethiopia will soon stretch out her hands to God." This brief prophecy has been interpreted for centuries as indicating a special role for Ethiopia, or more broadly for Africa, in a future spiritual awakening. Given all that we have discussed about Africa's connections to fallen angels, the Nephilim, ancestral knowledge, and central characters in the biblical narrative, this prophecy takes on profound additional dimensions. The Black Israelism, or Hebrew Israelite movement, which claims that Africans and people of African descent are the true descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, is based in part on these connections, arguing that the true Hebrews were black and that European Jews are imposters or later converts. While this specific claim is controversial and challenged by conventional historical and genetic evidence, it reflects an attempt to reclaim spiritual identity and biblical heritage that has been denied to African peoples. Regardless of the validity of these specific claims about Israelite descent, what is undeniable is that Africans have a legitimate and profound connection to the biblical narrative that has been systematically erased. When we look at current events through this spiritual and prophetic lens, we begin to see interesting patterns. There is a growing awakening among Africans and people of African descent about their true history, their spiritual heritage, and their role in the world. Movements of mental decolonization, recovery of ancestral traditions, study of ancient African languages, reconnection with pre-colonial spiritual practices, all these phenomena can be seen as part of a prophetic process of restoration. At the same time, there is a growing interest worldwide in esoteric knowledge, mystical traditions, and spirituality that goes beyond conventional organized religions. People are seeking direct spiritual connections, transformative experiences, and knowledge that has been preserved in mystery traditions. This global spiritual awakening is happening alongside a renewed interest in ancient civilizations, in apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch, in questions about the origin of humanity, and in the possibility of non-human influences on human development. The gradual revelation of the truths we discuss in this video about the connection between Africa and the descendants of fallen angels is not accidental. It is part of a prophetic process of unveiling. We are living in an era where information that was once accessible only to initiates in secret societies or specialized scholars is now available to anyone with internet access. Ancient texts have been digitized and translated, archaeological research is published online, and theological debates take place in public forums. This process of democratizing knowledge is unprecedented in human history and has profound spiritual implications. But with this access also comes the responsibility to discern truth from speculation, to carefully examine evidence, and to be open to truths that challenge our comfortable assumptions. The story we explore today is not a comfortable fantasy or an uplifting tale. It is an uncomfortable truth that exposes centuries of systemic oppression, cultural erasure, and spiritual violence. Acknowledging this truth requires courage because it means admitting that the narratives we have been taught were fundamentally incomplete or distorted. We now need to examine the most controversial and potentially dangerous aspect of this revelation. If the descendants of the fallen angels carry special genetics, encoded ancestral knowledge, or latent abilities derived from their not entirely human heritage, what are the practical implications for the present and future? The scriptures are clear that the Nephilim were Gibborim, a Hebrew word meaning valiant, powerful warriors. They were famous in antiquity, renowned heroes. But their strength and abilities did not necessarily make them virtuous. In fact, the biblical narrative suggests the opposite, that their power contributed to the violence and corruption that brought about the flood. This raises a fundamental ethical question. Extraordinary power without corresponding spiritual wisdom is dangerous. If there are individuals or communities today who carry this special heritage, they have a proportionate responsibility to use their abilities for good, for spiritual elevation, for healing and restoration, not for domination and oppression. African spiritual traditions generally emphasize balance, community, respect for ancestors, and alignment with natural and cosmic forces. The concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are, reflects an understanding of interconnectedness that contrasts dramatically with the competitive individualism that characterizes much of modern civilization. If African peoples are indeed descendants or spiritual heirs of those who received knowledge from the fallen angels, then the way that knowledge is applied must be guided by the principles of Ubuntu, by respect for life, by recognition of the sacredness of creation. This is especially crucial when we consider modern technologies and scientific capabilities that echo the forbidden knowledge mentioned in the Book of Enoch. Genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, climate manipulation, weapons of mass destruction. All these are forms of knowledge and power that can be used for good or evil. Just as the Watchers were punished for prematurely transmitting knowledge to humanity, unprepared to handle it, perhaps modern humanity is repeating the same mistake, developing technological capabilities without the corresponding spiritual maturity. The global ecological crisis, nuclear weapons, pandemics created or exacerbated by human intervention, all of this can be seen as consequences of knowledge without wisdom, of power without responsibility. In this context, the recovery of ancestral African spiritual wisdom is not merely a matter of historical justice or cultural pride. It is potentially crucial for the survival of humanity. African spiritual traditions have maintained an understanding of the sacredness of nature, the interdependence of all life, and the need for balance between opposing forces that modern civilization has forgotten or rejected. When African elders speak of consulting ancestors before making important decisions, when they emphasize rituals that maintain harmony between the visible and invisible worlds, when they insist on the importance of living in alignment with natural cycles, they are preserving wisdom that dates back to the days when humans and celestial beings interacted directly. This wisdom is not primitive or outdated. It is profoundly relevant to the challenges we face today. The question of identity is also crucial here. Centuries of colonialism, slavery, and systemic racism have taught people of African descent to see their origins as something to be ashamed of, their spiritual traditions as primitive superstition, and their skin color as a curse. This psychological and spiritual violence has had devastating consequences that persist to this day. Recognizing the truth about African heritage in the biblical narrative, about the connection to the descendants of fallen angels, about ancestral knowledge and spiritual significance, all of this can be profoundly healing. It can allow people of African descent to reclaim pride in their origins, reconnect with authentic spiritual traditions, and assume their rightful place as bearers of important ancestral wisdom. But this must be done with discernment and humility, avoiding the opposite mistake of creating new racial or spiritual hierarchies that simply invert old oppressions. We now arrive at the part where we need to discuss practical applications of this knowledge in your daily life, because understanding profound historical and spiritual truths is valuable. But what is truly transformative is when this knowledge changes how you live, how you see yourself, and how you relate to the world. If you are of African descent, this knowledge should inspire you to explore your ancestral heritage with new respect and curiosity. This might mean studying the stories of your specific ancestors, learning about the kingdom or region your family came from, researching the spiritual traditions that were practiced there, learning ancestral languages if possible, connecting with communities that maintain traditional practices. I'm not talking about romanticizing or idealizing the past, but about recognizing that there is real wisdom, real spiritual power, and valuable knowledge preserved in these traditions that have been marginalized or suppressed. When you pray, when you seek spiritual guidance, consider incorporating practices from your ancestral traditions. Honor your ancestors through appropriate rituals, seek their wisdom, recognize that they are part of a lineage that extends not only through generations, but potentially through millennia. back to the days when heaven and earth were not so separate. If you are not of African descent, this knowledge still has important implications for you. First, it requires you to examine and reject racist narratives that have been constructed to justify oppression. Recognize that Africa is not a backward continent that needs saving, but the cradle of humanity, possibly the cradle of spiritual knowledge, and the center of crucial biblical events. Second, challenge yourself to study history and biblical texts with a more global and less Eurocentric perspective. Read the Bible paying attention to all the African characters and African events that are there but are rarely emphasized in conventional teachings. Third, be open to learning from African spiritual traditions, recognizing that they preserve legitimate wisdom and are not inferior to the European traditions that may be more familiar to you. For everyone, regardless of ancestry, this knowledge about fallen angels and their descendants reminds us that spiritual reality is more complex and mysterious than the simplified versions that organized religion often presents. The Bible itself contains narratives of celestial beings interacting with humans, of giants and renowned heroes, of forbidden knowledge and divine consequences. But these stories are often ignored or minimized because they don't fit comfortably into ordered, systematic theologies. Allow yourself to ask difficult questions. What really happened in the days before the flood? Who were the Nephilim, and what happened to their descendants? Why are these stories in the Bible if they are not important for our spiritual understanding? What knowledge was transmitted by the fallen angels, and where is this knowledge preserved today? What is the appropriate relationship between humans and spiritual beings? These questions do not have easy answers, but the process of grappling with them can significantly deepen your spiritual life. In practical daily terms, this knowledge can inform how you seek wisdom. Don't rely solely on conventional sources or established authorities. Seek knowledge from diverse spiritual traditions. Read ancient texts that were excluded from the biblical canon, such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Study mystical traditions such as Kabbalah, Gnosticism, Sufism, and Eastern Christian mysticism, all of which preserve elements of the esoteric knowledge we are discussing. Explore African spiritual traditions such as the Yoruba, Fon, Akan, and Dogon, traditional religions, as well as their diasporic manifestations. Develop spiritual practices that honor both the transcendent aspect of the divine and its immanent manifestation in nature and all life. Cultivate humility by recognizing that there is much more to spiritual reality than you can fully comprehend. Seek wisdom but also discernment, because not all spiritual knowledge is beneficial, and not every spiritual entity has good intentions. The scriptures warn of deceiving spirits and false angels of light, so spiritual testing and discernment are crucial. We are nearing the end of this extraordinary journey through hidden truths, forgotten connections, and revelations that challenge centuries-old narratives. What we discover today is not a fringe conspiracy theory or unfounded speculation. It is a reconnection of dots that have always been there in sacred texts, African oral traditions, archaeological records, and historical patterns, but which have been systematically ignored or suppressed. The Bible clearly tells of fallen angels, their union with humans, the Nephilim born from this union, and the continuation of this lineage even after the flood. When we trace these narratives geographically, culturally, and linguistically, they consistently lead us to the African continent, particularly the regions of Kush, Ethiopia, Egypt, and beyond. Central biblical figures such as Moses, the Queen of Sheba, and many others had direct African connections. Crucial biblical events took place on African soil or involved African peoples. The knowledge transmitted by fallen angels, knowledge of metallurgy, astrology, magic, medicine, and other mysteries, was preserved in ancient African civilizations such as Egypt, Nubia, and Ethiopia, which demonstrated technological capabilities and spiritual knowledge that defy conventional explanations. African spiritual traditions preserved narratives about celestial beings who descended, mingled with humans, and generated special lineages, narratives that perfectly echo the biblical account of the Watchers and the Nephilim. This connection was systematically erased by centuries of colonialism, slavery, and racism that relied on the narrative of African inferiority for moral justification. Recognizing the truth about African heritage in biblical and spiritual history destroys these oppressive narratives and restores to African peoples their rightful identity as bearers of profound ancestral knowledge and significant spiritual heritage. This is not merely interesting historical knowledge. It has important practical implications for how we live our spirituality today, how we seek wisdom, how we relate to different spiritual traditions, and how we understand our own place in the spiritual history of humanity. We are living in a prophetic time when hidden truths are being revealed, when knowledge guarded in traditions of mystery is becoming accessible, and when a global spiritual awakening is taking place. The recovery of this truth about the African descendants of fallen angels is part of this greater awakening. For you who have watched to this end, who have invested more than an hour of your time in this deep exploration, you now carry knowledge that very few people possess. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you simply file it away as interesting information? Or will you allow it to transform your spiritual understanding, your historical perspective, and perhaps even your practical life? If this video impacted you, if these revelations resonated with something deep within you, then you need to take some action right now. First and foremost, subscribe to this channel now, because I will continue to bring content that explores hidden truths, challenges conventional narratives, and seeks to reconnect ancestral spiritual knowledge with modern consciousness. Leave your comment now saying which part of this video impacted you the most. Write exactly this: "The fallen angels changed my view of Africa." I want to see in the comments how many of you actually made it to the end and were transformed by this knowledge. Leave a like so the algorithm shows this video to more people who need this information. And absolutely crucial, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now, because I'm going to delve even deeper into these mysteries, exploring other connections that have been hidden and other truths that are waiting to be revealed. Don't stop your journey of discovery here. There's much more to learn, much more to understand, and much more truth waiting for you. The transformation you began today continues in the next video. Click now and continue your journey of spiritual awakening. See you there.